Welcome to the Cutting Edge Health Preventing Cognitive Decline podcast, where we're making 90 the new 40. I'm Jane Rogers. Buckle up for interviews with the world's brightest minds to help you live longer, better. And before we get to this week's guest, if you're short on time, and who isn't these days, I wanted to share that I have a quicker way to learn how to get more energy, a mind so fast it startles you, plus your personal questions answered in a weekly Q&A with me and a longevity-focused MD. Find out more at mycuttingedgehealth.com. Dr. Jeffrey Galvin is the founder of Vitality Medical Wellness Institute in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is well-versed in the various components of enhancing your health span and slowing the aging process. By slowing down or even reversing the aging process, you can decrease your chances of developing age-related diseases and maintain a sharp mind for a longer period. Moreover, with these lifestyle modifications, you can feel as though you're 40 when you reach 90. Dr. Galvin, thank you for coming on the show today. I'm very excited about this.
Well, it's my great pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
So you have a whole practice that, in a nutshell, helps people live longer, helps people slow aging, helps people prevent the diseases of aging like cognitive decline, cancer, heart disease. Do I have that right?
That's right. And, I think the other big thing is we reverse chronic disease, because you can't really optimize until you sort of get rid of all the underlying problems. And a lot of people come to us with diabetes or other issues that we've got to fix first before we can really set them on the pathway to really optimizing longevity and everything else in performance. Performance is a really big thing for us.
So if you had everything perfectly, what age would you like that person to walk into your office for their first visit?
Oh, if we had everything perfectly, we would start when they're kids, right? We would start, we would train their parents to do the right things at the very beginning. I think, how do you build, I always make this sort of comment, like, how do we build, vibrant, healthy 90-year-olds? Well, we start with probably, 30 and 40-year-olds, maybe 50-year-olds. Not that we can't build them out of 60-year-olds as well, but I think the sweet spot probably is if you can get started in your 30s, 40s, 50s, those are the time. And probably age 50 is about the age when people really start. A lot of people come to me around that age because they start noticing a decline. Now, we don't see that in our patients that start in their 40s, because we avoid that. But we have great success in really producing. I always tell people we want you to be younger next year. And I'm 56. I feel like I perform significantly better now than I did when I was 40. I mean, I'm much healthier for sure. But that's the goal, and to really keep that up for as long as possible. I think the idea is you want to stay healthy and really performing really, really well for a long, long time, and then sort of precipitously decline and die. So, and hopefully that's in our 90s.
And you're avoiding hopefully the years of disability when you've got that last 5, 7, 10 years and you're in a assisted care situation.
Exactly. And, what we do in medicine now, is we really manage people's decline. And that's not really the model I expound. I think we should, optimize performance and among every, whether it be metabolic, brain, physical, neurocognitive, whatever, optimize that and keep optimizing that for as long as possible. And then, we can't live forever, but the idea would be to really have a pretty precipitous decline in a year or two. And, my wife has a grandmother that passed away at 108, and she was pretty darn good until 106. And about 106, so I'll take 106 good years and two bad, years where I'm, maybe not what I was, but that's not what we do. We start at 50 and we basically have this like slow decline until, and you have two people that are going to end up passing away at the same age. What do you want to do? Do you want your performance to be this and that, or do you want to be this and have decades of decline? And we really strive against that decades of decline model.
I was reading recently, speaking of kids, you said, I'd love to get the kids and their parents in really early. I was reading that a baby has already been born that will live to be 120, 130 years old. Have you been reading that too?
Yeah, and I think there's some, there's a little bit of controversy about whether or not we're really capable of doing that naturally? Probably not. But I always tell our patients, there are technologies that are on the near horizon that are going to radically extend lifespan. They might be available in 5 years. They might be available in 10 or 15 years. But I can guarantee you this. If you are not pretty healthy when they become available, you're not going to be eligible for them. So if you're riddled with diabetes and neurocognitive disease and metabolic disease and heart disease, you're probably not going to be a great candidate for that. But if you're, 75 and you're in top shape, then you're going to absolutely be eligible for those therapies. And so that's the idea, is let's make people as healthy as possible, understanding that we're going to keep a close eye on all these technologies. And when they become available, we'll take advantage of them.
Mm-hmm. And you'll be ready for it. So let's start out. I see a couple different areas. If you're really thinking about wanting to take advantage of these technologies and being healthy enough to do it and being able to not have a slow decline, but maybe a quick decline, live longer in health. You have the health component, things you need to be healthy, like we just talked about. You need to really look at the anti-aging science, longevity science. What of that to incorporate? There are devices that help you out. And then there's also testing. So
right.
Can we kind of break this big animal down and say, let's talk about health first. What are some of the health things that are really important for someone to focus on if they want to live well longer?
Well, if we were going to play the Deadpool, and guess at how people are going to die, I would always bet cardiovascular disease, because it's the number one killer of men and women. So really, we want to do everything we can to minimize that risk. When I say cardiovascular disease, I don't only mean heart attacks, but I'm talking about heart attacks and strokes and similar. We know that dementia, Alzheimer's and its like, are rapidly increasing. And we think in the next decades, the numbers are going to skyrocket. Cancer is another thing we really need to kind of be aware of and set the stage for avoiding that. A lot of cancer is stemmed in innate metabolic disease. I think if you're diabetic, your risk of developing cancer is 6 times higher than if you're not. So I think the first stage, and what we typically do with our patients, is we do a very big evaluation. We want to look at all this baseline stuff and find out where people are. So you've got to really measure initially. And I think that health piece is, do you have heart disease? Do you have insulin resistance? Do you have evidence of excessive inflammation? Are you at risk of a slew of medical problems that might be related to your family history? So taking a deep dive into your own personal history and your family history is important. Getting an advanced set of labs where we're looking at markers for a lot of these things is important. Doing cardiac CTs and neurocognitive testing and fitness evaluations are important, because we really want to know, where are we starting? And you can't really decide where we're going until we know where we are. And so it really is important to do this sort of testing and looking at people's baseline health. And what we find is that, and I think we were talking about this earlier, is that medicine is really not interested in you being healthy. They're just sort of interested in managing your decline, really. Your doctor is not going to say, hey, listen, we're going to do these things to make you live longer. They're going to come in and you're going to spend your 5 or 10, if you're lucky, maybe 15 minutes with your doctor on a yearly basis. They're going to say, your labs look good. Oh, your blood pressure is high. Here's a medicine. Here's a prescription. And then they're gone. Nobody ever says, why is your blood pressure high? Why are you pre-diabetic? Why, if we don't address this now, 5 years from now, we're going to be dealing with this other problem. Why don't we fix it now while it's easy? And that's not really the way the system is designed. And I oftentimes have patients that come in and we discover, different things during their evaluations, and they get mad at their primary care doctors. And I'm always like, listen, I never hate on the primary care doctors, because what it's a horrible situation to be in. Like, they're not allowed to do what they would really love to do, and they're not trained to do it. They don't have the time to do it. They're so beaten down by the system. They don't want to go home and read. They don't want to, so they're kind of stuck in this sort of squirrel wheel of just clicking boxes and trying to get as many people in a day as possible. There's no way you can do well by it, but it's not your doctor's or your nurse practitioner or your PA's fault. It's not what they could do. They're not doing what they would love to do. They're doing what they're being forced to do. We sort of are outside the system. So I get to do what I feel is right. And, it's, so I have this benefit that other people don't. So I'm not a better doctor than those other doctors. I don't have the shackles on that they do. Mm-hmm. And so we can do what we think, do it because it's the right thing to do, not because I've got to, click these certain boxes and I've got to, fit enough, this number of people in my schedule or whatever else. It's important.
That's a really good point.
It's a system problem.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the different health things that you need to pay attention to.
Well, we always look at nutrition, fitness, sleep, stress, hormones, metabolic health, and try to paint a picture of giving people this idea of certainty, clarity, and direction that I think we mentioned before. Certainty, do the testing, figure out what's going on. Clarity, sit down and look at it through a lens of optimization, performance enhancement, and longevity. And then direction is do the things we need to do to fix problems, optimize things that may be normal but aren't optimal. And then after we kind of get people dialed in, then do the, really look at the biohacking and longevity aspect of things.
You've kind of got the ideal job, you know that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah,
because you have motivated clients. Pardon?
Yeah, very motivated. And, my training is emergency medicine and trauma. And that, type of patient doesn't really have, it's rewarding because we can fix stuff. But like generally it's your fault or, somebody's fault that you're there. You don't generally end up in the emergency department through, it's usually something happened. Either it's a chronic disease that you haven't taken care of, or it's a traumatic thing you didn't have any control over.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the health side. That's something that we really need to pay attention to starting as early as possible, hopefully 30, so you can ward off problems later. How about the longevity science? How do you bring all the anti-aging research that is really exciting right now into your practice?
I think we try to be pragmatic about it because, there are lots of, longevity research is difficult because it requires studying people over, great periods of time. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to do a longevity study in 5 years. And so a lot of what we are using is extrapolations of studies that may not be ideal. Rapamycin is a great example. We use rapamycin in our practice because there are animal studies that really show it enhances longevity. There are studies being done on rapamycin, but we won't have those results for decades. So we've got to look at best case scenarios. Rapamycin does a number of things, but it tends to enhance apoptosis, where we kind of go in and clean out old degraded cells and make way for new cells. And it showed significant longevity improvements in mice and other animal models. The nice thing is there's really very little downside. The way we dose it is really safe, and it's not used all the time, and it's used usually typically on a weekly basis for a series of weeks, and then with a little holiday taken, and we think we get good results with that. Metformin and other things that we use are based on extrapolations of studies, usually animal model studies, but technology is evolving in such that we can model some of these studies now with AI and other things. And so there are rapid advances, stem cell therapies, other things that we're learning and learning and learning. And my job is to stay very well versed on the literature, on the science, and then make treatment recommendations based on my best judgment of what's safe and efficacious for our patients. And then we always measure. So we use epigenetics, for example, to measure pace of aging. And we know that when we get people optimized in terms of their nutrition and fitness and their hormones and fix their metabolic disease, we roll back their pace of aging. We lengthen their telomeres. Their extrinsic epigenetic age lowers. And so we're able to measure those things. And so you never want to test without and implement without measuring. I mean, that's the whole scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, you implement it, and then you test it and you see if you were right or wrong. And so we've got 15 years now of data of our patients and significant improvements in health span in all of those people by doing these things.
So it's hard to average out all your patients over that 15-year period, but since you've been keeping all those records, how long does it take before you start seeing a reversal in your epigenetic age, your biologic age? How long? And then what are some of the cases you're most excited about. I reduced this guy's biological age by 15 years, 10 years, 5 years.
So what we do is we are typically repeating epigenetics at 6 months.
Okay.
And we're seeing pretty significant improvements. I've got a gentleman who actually the testing company contacted me because they're doing this thing called the Epigenetic Olympics, where they're essentially, see if I can get you a link, but they're essentially looking at people who've had the biggest changes in their epigenetics, and they were getting ready to roll this out. And they said, they called me up. They said, Dr. Galvin, one of your patients is in our top 10 in the country. And so this is a guy who I think when he started with us, his epigenetic age, his extrinsic, which is a measure of your immune system, which actually does correlate to longevity, he's a guy in his late 40s, maybe 50, 51, I can't remember exactly. And epigenetically, he was 70, almost 70, maybe 69, 70 years old. And 6 months later, he was 38.
No, really?
So huge change. And at the same time, we kind of reversed his diabetes, or his early diabetes. We had he changed his body composition radically. He lost 30 pounds of body fat, had gained 12 pounds of muscle, had dropped from a body fat percentage in the mid to low 30s down to I think 20%. And we think for most men in their 50s, 18 to 22 on the DEXA is a sweet spot that we try to hit. That's a body fat percentage that you can achieve pretty easily and maintain pretty effortlessly. Because could I get you to 15%? Yeah, but you're going to hate it because the amount of effort required becomes logarithmic. So get to a certain point to go down 1% body fat, you've got to triple the effort. And we're really, like I said, I'm a pragmatist. We want our patients to be happy and healthy. And I might be able to tell you that, hey, I'm going to give you this diet of sticks and rocks, and you're going to be as healthy as possible, but you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to do it. And so we try to figure out a way of, I'm a big believer in the 80-20 rule, get people dialed in. And once they get there, do what you're supposed to do 80% of the time. And 20% of the time, if you want, do whatever you want. If you want to go out for beer and pizza on a Friday night with your family, go ahead. Don't worry about it. We don't, but the rest of the month, try to be good. And if we do that, we've found we've had patients that have maintained their gains for 10 plus years now and are not doing anything extreme. And I know there'll be people watching, I know this is a health centered, probably the audience is more savvy than most. And you're going to have people that are absolutists and you must do this all the time. It's not realistic. We can't be perfect. And so let's embrace that and say, okay, if we can't be perfect, what is the best analog? And I think that 80-20 rule is good. I always use the example of chocolate chip cookies with my patients. I say, listen, if your favorite food is your mom's chocolate chip cookies, and I come in and I say, listen, you can be perfectly healthy, but you can never have those again. What's the chance of that being successful? It's not going to be successful. But if I say, listen, in the short term, we're going to put mom's chocolate chip cookies on the no list. But once we get you dialed in, if you want to do that once in a while, knock yourself out and enjoy them and bring some for me. That's the idea of that kind of happiness. And I'm not an absolutist, and I don't really believe that there's one way to eat or one way to train. Everybody's a little bit different. And, people ask me all the time, what's the best exercise? Well, I'm a CrossFitter. Do I tell everybody to do CrossFit? Absolutely not. The best exercise is the one that you'll do. That's, the one that you're willing to do. If it's just walking, fine. As long as we're doing something, we know that exercise is the best anti-aging medicine there is. By far, the best anti-aging drug is exercise. So I don't care what form that takes, just as long as we're doing it.
And are you telling your patients how often? How often should they get their heart rate up into their target zone and really sweat a bit every week? 3 times a week?
I think it depends on the patient. I've got patients that have chronic injuries that really can't do that have other problems. I generally think, 3 to 4 days a week of some kind of training, with 3 of those being significant. But we have a lot of patients that we just have do zone 2 training, which is zone 2 for me is literally walking on a treadmill. It's the most boring thing in the world. I can't stand it. Being a CrossFitter, I'm a little ADD about exercise and I want to be doing stuff, but I always, try to do what I do what I preach to people. And I did a zone 2 protocol getting ready for Murph, which is a big CrossFit workout that we do every Memorial Day. It's a mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 air squats, another mile. And I've been trying for a number of years to get my Murph time below like 45 minutes. And I typically am doing it at like 53 minutes has been, and I'm not a great runner and I hate to run. I'm decent with the pull-ups and the push-ups, but would run for a couple months before Murph and never seemed to have much of an effect. So about 2 years ago, did zone 2 for 2 months. Zone 2 training, which is a heart rate of, basically 180 minus your age. So for me, I couldn't run. It would get too high. I need to be about 125 being an old guy. And so I finally joined this like meathead gym near my house, where they had treadmills, and I would just basically put the treadmill at a certain angle and I'd walk at like 3 miles an hour. And I'd get sweaty, but you got to do it for typically about 150 minutes a week. So I do, 3 50-minute sessions. And the entire time I'd be watching that thing going 49 minutes, 48 minutes, like just hating it, just hated it, but did it for 3 months, went and ran Murph and did it in 42 minutes. So blew my old time away,
Good.
So, zone 2 training doesn't really require a big heart rate. So I think it's individualized in terms of, we really do precision medicine. We do these big evaluations and then we make recommendations based on the individual. But I mean, generally, I think 3 good days of working out a week with a 4th or 5th of like hiking or, some other activity thrown in is really optimal.
What I'm seeing is that the young people, I say young, 30s, even some in their lower 40s, they seem to be all over this, what you are offering, precision medicine, making sure everything's optimized. I'm seeing people who I thought originally would be so into this, people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, because they can just see their mortality out there, that they would be the ones who would be banging on your door saying, I want all of this because I want to live healthy longer. But they're not, at least what I'm seeing. Are you seeing the same thing?
We actually do see a lot. I mean, I think the majority of our patients are between 30 and mid 60s,
Okay.
And I think we see a lot of people that I think are feeling their mortality. They're starting to, see their parents get older. They're seeing friends have medical problems or pass away. So we do seem to engage a lot of people in their 50s and late 40s. It does seem like that is an age where people start feeling their mortality a little bit. I think they start noticing their own performance dropping. And remember that, I've got a bit of a skewed population. I've got people that want to be doing this stuff. They're high performers anyway. So I think they're more tuned in when their performance starts dropping. They're more tuned into it. And also, I think they're more apt to do something about it. So, the average person that doesn't know this is out there may just think, oh, I'm just getting older. It's like not that big a deal, whatever. Our population, there's bias because of the people that come to see me are not probably your average. Like they're not my average ER patient would not come to see me. They just want a pill. They don't want to really, and we've fostered that in the medical system, unfortunately. That sort of desire to just sort of get a pill and not have to do any real work. And I'm just going to defer to my doctor and they've got my best interest at heart. And they don't. I mean, I'm not saying that it's a sinister thing, but the system is not set up for you to be healthy. And the insurance system, the medical system, like we're not really interested in making people healthier. We're just interested in managing their decline, like I said before.
So you mentioned your ER patients and just give me a pill. Maybe my insurance will cover it or the state will cover it or something. I know coming to someone like yourself, a precision medicine expert, can be pricey for some people. I know it runs closer to $20,000 for one of these comprehensive visits that someone has when they come into your office. Can you recommend a path for someone who maybe can't afford that, but really cares and wants to do it?
Yeah. And if you want to come and do the full, 2-day thing where people fly, we have I mean, you're right. It could be $15,000 to $20,000, but we have a lot of people that we treat. We have what's called a health optimization program, which is just really kind of, in a nutshell, like fixing metabolic disease and optimizing hormones, which is much, much less than that. I think you've got to know, there's a few things you need to know. You need to know if you're insulin resistant or not. You need to know if you've got metabolic syndrome or not. You need to know what your own risk is. You need to know, do you have heart disease? Stress test. I mean, I laugh because we were just talking about this the other day. I don't know. In my career, I've probably taken care of, in excess of 1,000 heart attacks, probably. I cannot tell you how many times when that person comes in having that heart attack, they tell me, but I just had a stress test a month ago or a week ago or yesterday, or, and the fact of the matter is that the majority of heart disease is caused from plaque rupture, not occluded arteries, not blocked arteries. And that plaque that's in the wall of the vessel. And the first time you have a symptom from that is when you have your heart attack or your stroke. And unfortunately, in a significant number, 40% or more heart attacks, the initial presentation is death. And so there are better tests, cardiac CT scans, for example, coronary calcium scans that can give you an indication that you've got heart disease that is asymptomatic. And so we like everybody to get screened for that. We want to do like your ApoE status, like whether or not you've got the gene that's going to predispose you to Alzheimer's. There's, in a really dumbed down version, you've got this gene called ApoE. Back in the day when we were evolving, it was a very beneficial gene, but now it's not. It has to do with, it really increases our risk for not only for Alzheimer's, but also cardiovascular and metabolic disease. And you've got basically a couple different forms. If you've got this sort of normal form, ApoE3, we've got 2 copies of every gene. If you've got 2 ApoE3 copies, that's sort of best case scenario, and your risk of developing Alzheimer's is about 30%. If you've got 1 ApoE3 and 1 ApoE4, then your risk goes up to about 50%. If you've got 2 ApoE4s, it's 70%. So probably a good thing to know, especially if you've got a history of Alzheimer's in the family. It's not 100%. That's, the idea that it's not a death sentence, but if you follow kind of our standard medical recommendations and you develop, insulin resistance and obesity and you don't exercise, then that you're more than likely to fall into the 70% pool than if you keep yourself really healthy and dialed in and being in the 30% of that group that does not develop Alzheimer's. And I've got, a great story of a patient that we took care of years ago. We've always, kind of prided ourselves on being, way, way ahead of this curve. And we've been checking people for ApoE for over 10 years now. But I had a patient that came in for an evaluation from England, and his concern was Alzheimer's. And he had this incredibly sad family history of Alzheimer's. His parents both died young of Alzheimer's. He had a sister who was 10 years younger. He was about 65, I think, when he came to see us. He had a sister who was 10 years younger that had already had severe Alzheimer's. He had a brother that had Alzheimer's, all these uncles. And we did his testing. Sure enough, ApoE4. Yeah. And then we did the full slew of neurocognitive testing. And what did we find? Not a shred of any evidence of any cognitive decline. His brain was working, amazingly well. Good. And he asked me, he said, well, what's the deal? He goes, everybody in my family has this. I've got the gene. Why is it that they all have this disease and I don't have any sign of it? Well, this is a guy who's he's an executive. He's been fit. He's been an athlete his entire life. He's been really careful about his weight and managing his body composition. And, so he's taking great care of himself. So he made sure it never happened. If he was like his sister who was obese and had diabetes and, all these other problems, never exercised, then he would certainly have Alzheimer's. But he made the difference. We just tested. We didn't do anything for her, but he made the difference. And that's very easy to avoid. And if you can discover that your status when you're 30, then you might make different choices for the next 30 or 40 years than you might otherwise. And so that's very important.
I am so glad you said that, because my parents both passed with Alzheimer's, and I started showing signs of cognitive decline about 7-8 years ago, at same age as my dad. And I tested for ApoE4. I've got a 4 and a 3, so I have a 50% increased risk. And that's why I started this podcast, as a way to give back, to tell people exactly what you said. This can be prevented. We can do it, guys. And we just have to be smart.
Yeah, we reverse cognitive decline all the time. And it's interesting. There's a great book by Dale Bredesen called The End of Alzheimer's. I don't know if you've read it, but it's great.
He's been on the show.
Has he? Well,
yeah.
Dale's awesome. And I learned about that book because a fellow physician came to me. He's like, dude, you got to read this book. He goes, this guy is fixing Alzheimer's. And he goes, the crazy thing is he's using your protocol. I'm like, what do you mean? And sure enough, all the things that Dale's doing, those are the things we've been doing for a decade or more. Nutrition, fitness, sleep, stress, optimizing all those hormones. And we've reversed cognitive decline in many, many patients. The key thing is you got to find it early, but we've actually, had it I've had patients who have got parents in nursing homes and Alzheimer's units and find out what they're eating and find out that I actually had a patient that was in a nursing home recently, and his son was really concerned because he was declining rapidly. And we did his labs, and they'd given him diabetes. They were feeding him such junk. And so the son started having to bring in food for him. And about 2 months later, all of a sudden, he's having conversations again. He would sneak him out, and like they would only let him out of the place if he would could come to a doctor's office. So we would give him a doctor's note. We'd set up a little table and chairs outside, and they would have lunch outside of our office in the sun and have a great afternoon together. And but the son had to really take control. We got his hormones right, and he's doing very, very. This is now 3-4 years ago, and he's cognitively he's much better. He's not 100% better. He still sneaks the ice cream. They still don't feed him great over there, but he's much better than he was. And I'm sure that had we not done anything 4 years ago, he probably would either be dead or be completely lost at this point.
That's an impressive son who cares that much to step in and say, I'm going to take the bull by the horns and change the trajectory for my father. Yeah. Yeah.
And he came and asked me to help with the jailbreaks. I'm like, yeah, we're in. We'll be part of the conspiracy. Yeah.
Good. So we've talked about health and how important that is. We've talked about longevity and the anti-aging science. Let's talk about technology and how technology can help us achieve a lot of these goals that we have. What's some technology you use?
We use a lot of tech in our office. We have wearables that we use, things like the Whoop Band or Garmin's or Apple Watches or Fitbits to kind of track general activity. We use continuous glucose monitors with almost all of our patients because I started using those probably, I can't remember when they first became kind of broadly available, but probably 4 or 5 years ago, or it was when it first started becoming available. And I wanted a tool where I could sort of figure out what was happening to our patients' blood sugars because we're really interested in getting insulin levels low. I don't have a way of measuring insulin, but glucose is a good analog, right? If glucose goes high, I know it's going to be followed by an insulin spike. And I thought it would be helpful for me if I could see what was happening. And so we started using these. And very quickly, we found that it was a game changer for our patients because they could see in real time what was happening and it would change behavior. And all of a sudden, our patients started doing really, really well. And they were using the old ones, you had to scan all the time. And so and if they weren't doing well, we'd see these big gaps in the data and we're like, what's going on? Well, the new ones are continuous. They just go and it feeds back to me. So I have a whole dashboard of all my patients and I can look and every once in a while I'll send one of our concierge patients a message like, had a good time this weekend, huh? Yeah. I'm glad you guys had fun. And, we joke about it. But interestingly, we typically, before we implement anything, we oftentimes put one on a patient for a week or so. And then we kind of do their evaluation. We give them recommendations. And it's very interesting because we'll see a week's worth of data where the numbers are like this. And then all of a sudden, on Monday, we implement what we call functional nutrition, which is really a personalized nutrition protocol for the individual. But they'll do that, and all of a sudden, it does this.
Good.
It's striking. And the patients are like, oh, my gosh. And it really is a great tool because they have, anything you can give to empower your patients. And that's a really great tool. So that one we use quite a bit. In the clinic itself, we have tons of technology. We use a DEXA scanner, which is the gold standard for body composition and bone density, and we are able to use that. We have BIA devices similar to InBodies. We use a company called Tinita, but basically uses impedance to measure.
BIA. BIA
BIA,
is what it stands for?
body bioimpedance. I think the A is assessment. I would be lying if I only know is that, the salespeople are always coming and saying their sales pitch is always like, it's as accurate as DEXA. I have a DEXA, and I know it's not as accurate because we compare everything. But you can use, they're usable tools if they're used correctly. You have to understand the technologies are different. You have to understand what you're looking at. And it's a useful thing if we can normalize conditions. Those impedance measurements are really affected by like hydration. And a lot of times we'll put our staff members, when they come on board, we'll measure them 3 different times during the day. And sometimes you'll get a 5 or 6% body fat percentage change during the day. So the DEXA is not, they're very inaccurate, unfortunately. Now, if you can normalize the conditions, like we tell our patients, come first thing in the morning, don't work out beforehand, pee right before you get on the machine. If you can minimize the differences, it becomes more accurate. But we always look at those measurements with a bit of a grain of salt. We do VO2 max testing where we actually are measuring ventilated oxygen, ventilated CO2, see what people's aerobic conditioning is. We can use that same device to do a resting metabolic rate test, which I think you did, right?
Which is what I had.
Which basically,
that's how we met.
You sit breathing through that machine, and we can kind of tell you, like, how many calories you're burning at rest, and also where those calories are coming from. Are they coming from fat? Are they coming from carbohydrates? What percentage? We have a really complicated and advanced computer system to do neurocognitive testing that is very good for screening for early cognitive decline and loss of executive function, but also ADD and depression. And we have tools to screen for anxiety and sleep apnea and other things. Other technology we have, I'm looking at.
While you're thinking.
We do.
Do you use a smart scale? Do you use a smart scale, like a Withing scale? So
a Withing scale is basically the same as the BIA. It's a BIA device, right? It's an impedance-based device. The only thing that's smart about it is that it will connect to the internet. Those are less. So those consumer level ones that you get for $100 or so.
Yeah.
We have a medical grade device that is a 2-channel one, just like the Withings or Fitbit or whatever. It's probably $3,500, and then we have a 4-channel one where it measures basically impedance between the legs, but also the legs and the arms to the arms. Those are about 10 or 15 grand, and then the DEXA scan, which is about $50,000 to $70,000. So we have all 3 devices. And we use the basic ones on a weekly basis. We use the more advanced ones monthly, and then we do DEXAs quarterly. And so we have all this data to compare. So, and if you do it right, if you have a 3% body fat drop on the BIA devices, a lot of times it approximates to about 3% on the DEXA as well.
Okay.
But you might measure out at 15% on the BIA device, and in reality, you're 24 on the DEXA. So they're not really comparable to each other. We also do ultrasound. We have ultrasound. So we were looking at carotids for risk stratification, but we can use that ultrasound for a lot of different things. We do EKGs. We have a lot of tech that's in the that is in the clinic itself as part of the evaluation. And then we're always on the cutting edge. So, as new things come out, we have devices that look at heart rate variability, for example. We used to have some standalone devices, but now we have, devices like the Whoop or Garmin's or things like that. You can get heart rate variability measurements. That's a great way of looking at recovery. We're very interested in resting heart rate measurements because, the lower your resting heart rate is, the fitter you are and the healthier you are. I've got a doctor friend that says, you're born with a certain number of heartbeats.
Yeah,
and if your resting heart rate's lower, you're going to live longer. And there's some, it's overly simplified, but there's probably some merit to that, because if you're fitter, you're going to live longer, because we talked about anti-aging and exercise.
I struggle with my resting heart rate, and I'm pretty fit, but my husband's is like it's 47 or 48, and mine's like 68 or 70, and I just wish I could get it lower. I've tried so hard.
Yeah, and there's some genetics involved in that as well, and everybody's and some people have hyperdynamic heart rates, so their resting heart rate's low, but they for example, I have a low resting heart rate, but like 2 minutes into the warm up, like no matter what it is, my heart rate's like 130, like that.
Really?
Yeah, And when I'm working out, I hit typically very high heart rates, but that's just me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could talk with you all afternoon because I'm fascinated by this topic. Is there anything else you would like to add? Like maybe I'm interested in what you're doing personally. Are you doing anything right now that's new that you are excited that you're trying out on yourself?
Anything new? The rapamycin is something that we use with a lot of our patients that I do use, and we're looking at the epigenetic effects of that. I'm going to probably do another zone 2. As much as I hate it, I'm going to probably do another zone 2 trial to look at combining that with a strength protocol to sort of look at our baselining and see how do we, I want people to, how do we do it the simplest way possible? That's what I've got to make things simple for our patients. Yeah. Our patients are busy, and so I could easily say, work out, if you just get 10 hours a week of fitness in, that'd be great. It's not going to happen. So one of the things I'm looking at is like, are there ways that we can maximize the efficiency of both the aerobic training and strength training and minimize the amount of time? So we're getting ready to do a little protocol with a combination of zone 2 with strength training and see, how can we, maybe get it down to, 3 60-minute sessions in a week or multiple 30-minute sessions and looking at body composition changes and things like that. Other than that, I'm not really doing anything brand new that I'm super excited about. I've just got the Whoop a couple months ago. I'm starting to, get a better sense of how we might use that to modify things with our patients. I'm always interested in what we can do to make our patients do better in a simpler way, And I've got people that I've got patients that really want to geek out and everything, but I've got a fair number of people that just want to feel good and be healthy and, don't really want to get into the weeds like some of our other patients do.
Dr. Galvin, thank you for your time. This has been just delightful. Thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
You have a great day.
You too.
You've been listening to the Cutting Edge Health Podcast, created and hosted by Jane Rogers. The website is cuttingedgehealth.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and would very much appreciate your writing a review. They help a lot, and we read each one. Any information shared on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Guest opinions are their own. This podcast is not responsible for the veracity of their statements. The comments expressed are not medical advice. Do not use any of this information without first talking to your doctor. This podcast and Jane Rogers disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects from the use of any information presented. Thank you for listening and have a beautiful day.